We're here to talk about the NBA Finals, Miami Heat and the Denver Nuggets. But before we get into that, we got to talk about the team that got eliminated by the Miami Heat, the Boston Celtics. And there's been a lot of news. Bob Myers has stepped down as the Golden State Warriors general manager. Nick Nurse replaced the Doc in Philly. The Bucks hired a first-time coach, and Adrian Griffin. But what everyone really cares about is what are the Celtics going to do next? And James, I think the Celtics have three options because I think every team after every season has these three options.
Yeah.
Do you run it back? Do you tweak at the edges? Or do you make major moves? So just from your assessment of the Celtics season, because we have to remember, best net rating in the league, I think second best record in the league, made the finals last season, lost their head coach in the offseason, got a first-time 34-year-old head coach, won more games they did the season before when they made the finals, lost in Game 7 of the Eastern Conference Finals, almost overcame a 3-0 deficit in the Eastern Conference Finals, only to lose in Game 7. So for most people, that's a successful season in a lot of ways. But for these Celtics, it feels like a massive disappointment. What option are you taking? You have three doors, and there's probably a car behind all three. But which car do you want?
Yeah, I would tweak at the edges, man. So I think there were three problems with Boston this year, right? I mean, again, we are talking about a team that had a really good season, but in terms of why they're not going to win the NBA championship, right? Problem number one, probably the hardest one to solve. Al Horford kind of really fell off, especially on the defensive end. He does not have that mobility anymore. I felt like the Heat were hunting him a lot. I felt like he couldn't keep up in transition, and I think that they're going to have to find a way to replace him, right? That's one. Two, they don't have a point guard. They really literally don't have a point guard. And this idea that like a platoon of combo guards can work, I think that there was some validity in it. It wasn't entirely stupid because Smart can handle a little point guard responsibility. Brogdon can handle a fair amount, and even Derek White can sort of run points. So I think they thought these are all really good guards. If we put them all together, it's kind of like having one point guard. I can see that, but I think what we've learned is that it's not like having one point guard. They need a primary ball handler who offers ball security and can kind of manage and run an offense. Doesn't have to be a star; it just has to be a guy like that. Thirdly, I know I'm biased saying this as a Rockets fan, it might come off away, but I really do think that Udoka to Missoula was a coaching downgrade. I know we're going to get into this, but at least we talked about we might. But yeah, I don't think Missoula is necessarily the guy. I think this offense really stagnated a lot this year. I thought Udoka had a nice motion thing running that sort of fell off the rails this year, and I think coaching is probably partly to blame for that. So I would tweak around the margins by getting a point guard and then getting the best budget Al Horford replacement that you can. You probably won't be able to replace like 2 years ago Al Horford because that's an incredible player, but the best budget replacement that you can find.
Yeah, I mean, tweak at the edges is the most prudent thing you can do. Especially as as we said earlier, this is a really good team. I will say that there are very few teams in recent history that have won a championship where you're not confident that their best player can just have the rock and run offense at a really high level, right? The best example of that recently would probably be Giannis, but Giannis is such a force of nature going to the rim, and he's he's probably a better passer than Tatum, right? At least through his rim pressure, he creates more valuable chances for his teammates, right? So there's just not a lot of precedent for a team winning a title without an elite kind of focal point guard or creator, right? The Nuggets have Jokic, the Warriors have Curry, obviously. Even the Suns had Devin Booker and Chris Paul when they made the finals, and they're very good. I think that's why the tweak at the edges thing we were saying, I agree, the point guard by committee didn't really work, and it doesn't really work, I think, at the highest level. And it's kind of why I would say maybe the major move is actually the move you need to make, because I think your margin for error and your level of execution, if on at a team wide offensive level without an elite point guard or a guy who can be an elite point guard for stretches, right? Like when the Lakers won it all, LeBron was a point guard, right? And so your margins on offense, you have to be so locked in, so effective all the time that I think it's just like, why have they sucked in the crunch time the past 3 seasons? Because in crunch time, it's much easier and more effective and safer and better to just say, hey, here's the ball, dude. Cook. Are you going to score? Are you going to pass? You're not going to turn the ball over. You're not going to get rattled. You're going to make everyone a little bit better. And it doesn't matter what the defense throws at you because you're a magician.
So let me. A lot of great points I mostly agree with, but are the championship Raptors a bit of an exception? They didn't like
Well,
Tatum
that
could function as a Kawhi Leonard offensively. I think pretty much, can't he?
see, I don't think Tatum's anywhere near peak Kawhi Leonard, right? Like peak Kawhi Leonard is one of like the 5 best players in the league. Um, Kawhi, I think, was a better scorer in the mid range and better able to like generate and create contact in like really condensed situations. And the team also had Kyle Lowry and Fred Van Vliet on that team. So like their point guard by committee was at a much higher level than what the Celtics have, in my opinion. Because Kyle Lowry back then was like all-star caliber player. And maybe they didn't have it completely where their best player, you're like run offense, but like look at the Clippers. When they need buckets over the past few seasons, they give the rock to Kawhi and good things happen, right? Like they went down 2-0 last year, or what the last time he was healthy, 2 playoff runs ago against the Mavericks, and Kawhi went God mode, right? Like he took the rock and scored at will.
I just wonder how Tatum would look alongside like Kyle Lowry if they could just duplicate that version of Kyle Lowry, pluck him onto these Celtics. I kind of think they're in the NBA Finals for the second year in a row.
That's true.
Uh,
That's true.
right? So it's it's a little tricky that way. I agree with you that Tatum is probably not quite on the level of prime Kawhi Leonard, and obviously we're just talking about offense because Leonard was like the best two-way player in the league.
Yeah.
And Tatum's a good defender, but he's never going to be a Kawhi Leonard level defender. Uh, but I think he's not that far off offensively. He's probably not quite there, but I don't think he's that far off. So I would just say go get your Kyle Lowry's basically my solution
Yeah.
for Boston this summer, and get a new head coach probably.
Ooh, okay, okay. So I actually disagree with that. I don't know why. Like, look, Joe Mazzulla is a first-time rookie head coach who was thrust into the position, I think, probably a year or two before he was ready. But the Celtics were really, really good. They got better on offense than they were a better offensive team than they were the season before. He in some ways he modernized their offense and just said like we're gonna go 3-point heavy, and you could argue that like came back to bite them, but also like if I'm not mistaken, I think they had the second best offensive rating in all of the playoffs, right? Like the offense didn't let them down as much as their defense kind of fell off, and maybe that's where the coaching downgrade was. Yeah, the Celtics 117.2 points per 100 possessions, second best behind Denver, who we'll get to later, but this is just a silly number. Denver throughout the playoffs, 121 offensive rating, um, which is silly. But really the defense, was 113.7. Like I, I don't know. Like I think it's easy to blame Missoula for a lot of things because he's like the one difference. But realistically, if you go look at like the 3-point shooting that the Heat had in some of these games and 3-point shooting the Celtics had in some of these games, it's like how much of that is on Missoula? Like they did slow down Jimmy Butler after 2 games, right? Like he wasn't great in game 3 that Heat obviously won by a lot, but like I don't know, like who's better than Joe Mazzulla that's out there, right? Like that's the question. Like, do you just say, well, let's just throw the bag at Monty Williams so we have a fourth new head coach in the last 4 seasons?
All right, okay. So let me say this. Maybe I overstated by saying they need to go replace Missoula because your last point I especially take well. It's like, is it really worth disrupting the pecking order again when there's not necessarily a guy on the market that's all that inspiring. That's true. All the best coaches are pretty much hired now, right? So yeah, point made in that regard. Maybe they shouldn't fire Missoula. I would monitor Missoula. I would say that, and this year I would keep an eye on it and consider it, because I will say that I do think that modernization of their offense and that more analytic friendly approach kind of did hurt them in the playoffs. I think part of why their 3-point percentage fell off a cliff is because same way that the 2017-18 Rockets did with like when you insist on like threes and layups only, you don't vary your offense enough, and the math will often betray you in the end, I think. You're
Yeah.
relying too much on variance, and you're not asserting enough control over your own offense. You're saying, well, we're gonna take the shots, and the math dictates that they ought to go in. It's like I prefer an offense that's seeking to generate good shots, not just a massive 3-point shots. I thought they were a little too D'Antoni-esque. There's too much isolation, too many contested threes, not really great offense in my opinion. Down the stretch of these playoffs.
Yeah, the offense got funky. And as much as like, and the question for me is always like, is it the coach's fault or is it the coaches working with the players he
Yeah,
has? And like I'll say this, right? Like that game 7, they got absolutely murdered. But Tatum literally sprained his ankle like 20 seconds into the game. And then you're basically your only chance to win that game if you don't have Tatum being able to like run the offense consistently is Jaylen Brown, your time to shine against one of the best defense, especially one of the worst defensive matchups for him possible. And that's like a very turnover heavy defense in the
yeah.
Miami Heat. Like that's a nightmare for Jaylen Brown. And like he just clearly can't handle that level of responsibility on offense. And then you throw in the fact that like Malcolm Brogdon couldn't actually shoot and he would have been your next guy to like kind of run the offense. So you're like in a game 7 and realistically your best ball handler is Derek White. And like that's kind of why I feel like the major move makes the most sense to me just because it's like they can win a title with this team. But like all of the issues that we've seen have been like, why aren't they more consistent? And it's just like, well, because they don't have that consistent offensive focal point. And I think like that's the main things. Like I think Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown are two of the most overrated players in the entire NBA. I think Jason Tatum's really good. I think he's like a top 15 player, but I don't think he's top 10. And I don't think he's anywhere near top 5. And then Jaylen Brown, like he's good, but like I really think he's kind of more of that like third best player on a title team, not your second best, second most important offensive player. And so it's kind of like they need that guy because if they keep both of them, as we discussed over messaging, if they keep both of them at like those max numbers, the strength of this team was their depth. And like that's why the tweak at the edges thing I find is like so difficult. It's like they're already so deep. How are you going to upgrade that depth realistically when you're capped out? And are you going to keep that depth? Because that was their third superstar, was they had the depth that no one else could have.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Uh yeah, there's a lot that I want to say, but then it kind of gets discredited by the depth argument, and so like
Yeah, it,
I'm doing circles in my head a little bit. But I guess the hope there is that you hit on a guy on a value contract, which maybe isn't optimal planning, but like
yeah.
for just for example, I really like Tyus Jones as a target for them this offseason, right? Suppose they could land him.
I
Uh
I'll say this: their ability to land him is directly tied to Adam Silver's suspension of Ja Morant and
yeah,
the length of it. If there's like no real suspension, he might be a possibility. If there is
because he's
a
in a contract year and he's going to get at least 20 million on the open market. And I don't think Memphis is going to spend 20 million a year on their backup point guard, right? So I do think Tyus Jones is a viable trade candidate this year. But you're right. If Morant's out for half the year, a third of the year,
you can't trade him.
you
Like
can't
you
trade
just
him. Yeah,
you literally
but
can't.
let's just use it as an illustration, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So they land Tyus Jones this year. Well, so Tyus Jones is only making like I think 12 million a year right now. If
I
I
think he's closer to 20. I think he's closer to 20 because he
let,
signed that extension or he signed that new contract with them, and it was like I think it was like around 19 million per season.
me find out because if so, it's not a good example. 14. He's making 14 next year.
14. Okay,
So
yeah, you could do that. Like,
splitting the difference a little bit. Right, but so yeah, like that's a bargain contract right now, right? So if you can go get guys like that, then maybe you can still have depth. Like it's gonna take some creative team building for sure. The
yeah,
Celtics have decent draft capital, not great, but like they're not totally without picks. They have picks they can trade. Like so there could be avenues towards putting together a good team, like a Kelly Olynyk reunion could make a lot of sense in terms of replacing Al Horford, like they're just gonna have to maybe get a little creative, but although it's definitely a valid concern, I wouldn't necessarily break the Jays up on the basis of they're not going to be able to preserve their depth because I do think let me say this, like let's assume that they can find creative ways to supplement their depth, all right?
yeah,
Now, I say this. In theory, there are reasons to question this for sure. Like there's not great collective ball handling between the two of them. Neither is like a ball handling superstar. They're both a little overrated. I can accept that. I might even agree, right? But on the other hand, there's proof of concept. Like they went to the finals and then they went to the conference finals. You know what I mean? Like they obviously they can do stuff together. I would just keep investing in it personally, but it's
yeah.
it's a tough one.
So to me, the Celtics are in the weirdest position where, like, they're like, let's talk about their window, right? Like, this window feels like it should be open for a long time. Like Tatum and Brown are what, like 25 and 26, 26 and 27, that range.
25 and 26, yeah.
Yeah. People say, oh, like Brown has another level to get to with the ball handling. And I'll say this. If Jaylen Brown becomes a better ball handler, sky's the limit. But the thing is, like, he's already become a significantly better ball handler, right? Like,
Yeah.
people are like, oh, well, like that means he can keep getting better. I would say, okay, but like when you look at prospects, if they're really bad at something, there's a reason. They're just naturally not very good at it, which kind of dictates that there's like a little bit of a limit on the ceiling of that skill set. I'm not saying he can't get better at dribbling. I'm just saying how much better can he realistically get where it's not just like you basically being like, yo, I mean, what if Giannis had a 3-pointer? Like, what if?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great. What if Giannis could hit jumpers? Yes, game over, league over. He's the
Yeah.
GOAT. Um,
Right.
so
No, and
like,
also, sorry to interrupt you. I'm pretty sure most coaches would say that ball handling is like the most difficult skill to develop. I could be wrong.
yeah,
Uh,
so
but
hard.
also, yeah, your point is especially well taken. That like, yeah, he could get better. I wouldn't plan for that eventuality though. Like, it's more likely than not that Jalen Brown will retire as a below average ball handler. That's more likely than not. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and then Tatum, like I think Tatum, like he's shown the ability to consistently, like every season, I feel like he gets a little bit better, and that trait I really like in players. I just feel like I believe that those guys that show that they're going to get better every offseason usually do throughout their prime. But like for him to get better, it's like one of his issues is he's not this explosive athlete. He's got good positional size. He's a tough shot maker, but he doesn't have the ability to create easy shots in the way that a lot of really high end players do. And that's kind of why I feel like he's a little bit capped where it's like, can he really get in that top 10 player in the league thing, right? Like he's in that top 15 discussion for me. Super durable throughout his career. So like he's obviously more valuable than like the 15th best player in the league in terms of like a per minute basis because he gives you so many minutes. It's just like if you're banking on those two guys getting better and you're gonna lose some depth, it's like was this their best run? And like I think that would be my fear of like tweaking at the edges or running it back where it's like maybe this was like the best period that they're gonna have, right? Like teams are gonna get better and they're gonna have to keep getting better. And Al Horford's super important. He's older, going to be gone soon. Malcolm Brogdon, like this team's kind of locked in where it's at. But after next season, I think it's going to start kind of fading away. And so you're really banking on that internal development. So I just go, why not try to like just open the window and improve your upside a little bit right now when you still kind of have this super team? Like this is a super good team.
All right. I think we should move on to the finals after this,
Yeah.
unless you have anything to. But these would be my closing comments anyway. You raise a good point, right? So let's say there are two, broadly speaking, two qualities that tend to define star players, right? The ability to create easy shots or the ability to hit difficult shots, right? Like those are basically, if you're a superstar in the NBA, you could probably do one of those two things, right?
You almost have
And
to.
yeah, right. You can do one of those two things. And what you would say, and I agree, is that a problem that Boston has is that they have two guys that can hit difficult shots more easily than they can create easy shots, right? That's like LeBron James was the king of creating easy shots. You know, that's what he did. Like, I'm getting to the hole, and if you cover me, I will make the pass. And either my team's getting an open corner three or they're getting an open layup. Neither of the Boston's guys have that. It's more like, we can hit deep contested threes with two defenders on us. I see that, right? But I would still just defer to the proof of concept thing. It's like they made the finals, they made the conference finals. I would be inclined to invest in it and just get a solid, sturdy point guard and the best Horford replacement I can, and at least give it one more year because they're also both young enough that they'll still have trade value too, right? So
That's fair.
if next year, it's a conference semifinals ceiling, then I'm gonna go, yeah, no, this is dumb. We're just getting worse every year, like what are we doing? But I would still give it one more year if I were Boston.
I actually agree with you just on the account of like the only major move I would make would be like Damian Lillard.
Yeah, that so Brown for Lillard, like
With
pretty
whatever
great.
else, yeah, with whatever
But
else.
that would be the meat of the trade, yeah.
But yeah, it's like that's the only trade that I think is like realistically available that I would be like, I'm absolutely doing. Like the other
I would
one,
have to consider it.
yeah, the other one that like I would maybe consider would be like maybe DeJounte Murray for Jaylen Brown because like it actually gets you cheaper and you could get another player and probably a pick back. And I think DeJounte Murray, like in San Antonio when he was the lead ball handler, was really good. Wasn't very good this season because he was playing off ball and like that's not really his role. I think he would make Tatum better. I think you would have be less reliant on the whims of Marcus Smart's offensive game, which can be at times like really beneficial, but at other times just like, dude, like this guy isn't an NBA quality point guard right now, right? Like he just can't be out there and he's a good defender, right? Like I think like that would be the only other one I would consider, but that would require Atlanta wanting to move him, which I don't know why they wouldn't after this season where it's like, hey, like this didn't work, like we fucked up, but like if we can turn this fuck up into Jaylen Brown, like we're not getting fired right away, right? Like,
Yeah.
um, and so like that, those are like the only two moves, and so like I'm inclined to agree with you. Just like let's tweak for one more season, and if we can't get to where we want, maybe that's like maybe this is just this team because as much as we're like the proof of concept, they made the NBA Finals. They also back to back seasons, game sevens in the second round. Like there's a real chance that this team hasn't made to the conference finals, right? Like this core hasn't made to
Yeah.
the conference finals, right? And so like you go, and if that's the case, what's the conversation? We say there is no proof of concept. You're the fucking Embiid Sixers, right? Like you got to make moves, you got to do something big. But they did make the finals, and they looked like they should have won the finals, and they looked like they should have beat the Heat. To be completely honest, right? Like you play this series 10 more times. I think what the Celtics win 8 out of the
Seven.
10.
7 or 8. Yeah.
Yeah, like
Yeah, no, I agree.
and so it's like you're right. There's the proof of concept, but also it's just like this is the best team I've ever seen that is very, very, very bad at taking care of business.
It's true. It's true. And there does seem to be something like in the locker room or between the players or like there did to me to my eye it looked like there was a little bit of quitting going on at times, which is crazy to say for a team that came back from 3-0 to make it 3-3. But when they were going down 3-0, they looked super deflated to me for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, and that's kind of goes back to like the lead ball handler thing. It's like I think there is a confidence and energy you get from knowing you have a guy that can just do it.
Yeah.
And I don't think anyone on the team feels like there's a guy that can just do it. And it's like Tatum and Brown are those guys. And I think they both think that they can do it, but they kind of don't think the other one can a little bit. And so like I do think there's some like weird tension going on there. But look, Celtics, great team. I'm gonna say it's great season. First year head coach, I think did a really good job. He made adjustments. don't blow this up completely. Um, is all I'm
Yeah.
gonna say, and that means retaining Joe Mazzulla.